Good morning, YouTube. It's 10 a.m. in the great state of Texas, and today we're going to be doing something way different than we usually do. So I wanted to do some larger projects. If you guys watched last week's video, you guys noticed that I did a larger project than I usually do, and decided, you know what, it's time that we just step up our game on the channel, and I need to update my skills and just start moving on to bigger, better projects. So that's what we're doing in today's video. So I had this piece of wood that's been out here on my porch. It's firewood. We were supposed to just burn it, but I decided to take it up, clean it up, and use it in a woodworking project. So if you go back 4 years ago, I cut a piece of wood like this on a miter saw. I don't recommend doing this. This is not smart. Don't do this. The reason why I'm going crazy slow on this is because the time I did this previously, the miter saw caught a knot on one of these pieces of wood and I nearly cut my hand off. So would not recommend this technique to anybody. Don't do this. This is just not smart. But got it done. Surprisingly, it went well. I took my time, slowed down. I think it'll be okay. So far, still kept all my fingers. So that's always a good thing. And now we're just taking these little pieces of wood and just cutting them down into nice little shapes. If you've watched my previous videos, you guys know that I usually just use like leftover pine board that I'll get from like Lowe's or Home Depot or someplace, and that's what the majority of my project wood usually is. But I've decided that I just really need to step up, the projects that I'm making, because I've done 4 years of making projects where they're smaller, they're a lot safer, just cranking out content kind of thing. But I've decided I'm going to start doing larger projects. Not that we're never going to do smaller projects ever again. We're just going to do primarily just larger projects, or at least that's the goal. And, all goals come with problems. So this will just be like anything else. We'll see how it kind of goes. But cutting down the wood, not a lot of issues. Once we got it cleaned up, got all that dust and dirt from West Texas off of it, it cleaned up pretty good. And all we're going to do is add some blue epoxy, a lot of epoxy on this project. So I picked up this bowl blank, found this one at Home Depot. Not Home Depot, the dollar store. I was buying something else at the dollar store and saw this big, nice, round plastic Tupperware thing, and I was like, this will work. So got everything glued down. Everything went relatively well. Everything fit. I measured out the epoxy perfectly. Like, that never ever happens. But 4.5 hours later in the pressure pot, and this is kind of what it looks like. Absolutely gorgeous. However, you can see the cracks that are on there, and you can see where my thumb is. That these small little cracks just getting in there, making things a little bit difficult. And I'm like, oh my God. Because I've done larger projects before in the past, and sometimes they'll crack like that because the epoxy isn't deep pour epoxy, but usually I'm just able to fix it. So what we're doing here is just taking some more epoxy, and my goal is just to essentially fill in these small little cracks. And there was a spot on the side that had like a giant void in it as well. So what we're doing here is just getting everything filled in. So 4.5 hours later, and now we're just trying to take it out of the mold. I'm trying to save the mold. And by the way, when I took this out of the pressure pot 4.5 hours after I had poured it, man, that thing was still smoking hot. But turned out really well. I really love the marbling on this. I might have used too much hot glue, and I probably am going to try this project again next week, but maybe in a different color, maybe not use so much hot glue, because that definitely was a little detrimental to the project once we got it onto the lathe. But really like how the casting came out. Those small little cracks were concerning, and that'll come into play a little bit later in the project. So using the deck screws again and my Ryobi drill, I need to use my impact driver next time, because the Ryobi was like just screaming for mercy when I was trying to put these deck screws in there. But we got that on there real nice and tight. Putting this on the lathe, the clearance for this totally fit, surprisingly. So I'm like, okay, giving it a good spin, thinking this is going to go relatively well. And just like everything else, there's going to be some issues. So the epoxy set up for about 4 to 5 days in total. Actually, it was more like 5 or 6 days, the epoxy set up. So with deeper pours, most of the time I'm worried about the epoxy not curing. And every time that I get to the lip of the bowl near the headstock of the lathe, a small little piece will shoot off and hit me right in the arm. I didn't show it on camera, but I should have. I got like cuts and bruises now, because once the chisel hit the lip of the bowl, these shards of like shrapnel come off, and you can see what that piece looks like there. So threw that at the lathe, and I was like, man, not cool, not cool. So I learned my lesson there a little bit. I knew that was going to happen. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes we're just really good about it, but there was a lot of wobble on the lathe. So this is like a MIDI lathe. I've done one project larger than this, and it held up good. And the lathe is bolted down, not bolted down, but it's secured down to the actual workbench. But just a lot of wobble because of the unevenness right now, and we're just trying to get it down to a good smooth pattern. And I end up stopping and starting the project a couple of times on this one, just trying to get everything even. So here's the slow motion, you can see it. And the crazy thing, usually we get really nice ribbons, but you can see here in the slow motion footage, you can see the unevenness of the ribbons, and that's because the actual blank itself is like vibrating violently kind of on the lathe, so we're not getting those good deep cuts like we're supposed to, like we typically do with our smaller projects. But we're still getting good ribbons off, we're getting good material, and everything is just kind of splaying out like that, which is a little bit of a problem, but we worked through it, coming back between different size chisels for different parts of the actual project, which can sometimes be a little bit annoying, but I knew we were going to have some issues like that when we started this project, and not too bad. And now that we're taking material off, you can actually see the wood grain come out, and I liked how this looked initially. Maybe next time we won't do even lines on those pieces of wood, but overall really happy how this is turning out right now. I think it looks absolutely fabulous. Just happy that it's still on the lathe. And this took a lot longer, obviously. If you've watched my smaller projects, usually I get this done in like a couple of 10 minutes, but I think total time on the outside of the bowl I spent maybe 35 to 50 minutes total between starting and stopping the lathe, coming back and forth, just trying to get everything nice and even. Took the tailstock off, and now we're just trying to get everything even again, but the shaking of the actual lathe is causing us to have issues. So this part went relatively well. When I was making the mortise, I might have gone a little bit too wide on it. The chuck jaws, I was concerned that they weren't going to be secure, so I wanted to get it in there nice and deep, so that it had a secure fitting on it. So got that done, and then you can hear the Ryobi drill like crying for help, trying to take these screws off. And by the way, I use Ryobi tools. You'll get some woodworkers that say, screw Ryobi, it's just made in China, pieces of crap. But I like using those, so I don't care. Use what you got. That's essentially what I'm saying. Not everything has to be DeWalt and all these high-speed brands or whatever. But here we are. All I was doing there was taking off and changing the carbide tool heads, taking the bits and changing them out to new ones. Surprising fact, I hadn't changed those bits in literally years. I think it was like 2 years since the last time I changed a bit. I'd sharpened them, but it was time to obviously change them out and get some new ones in there. And once we started this part, the actual epoxy is coming off, hitting the camera a lot. And this wood is so old. How old is it? It's so old that it just basically just dust flying everywhere, and it's getting all gunked up in the camera. So initially I started gouging it out, and I had to stop the lathe more times than I wanted to, only because it would come off the chuck jaws. It was vibrating off the chuck, and I was like, I was waiting for it to pop off the lathe, to be honest with you, but I've learned over the years, stop the lathe, readjust, secure it to the chuck. You're just going to have a better outcome with that, because I remember if you go back again and watch my videos from the first year I started doing woodworking, everything would fly off the lathe, and I just learned that you just got to go and readjust those chuck jaws, and I probably need to tighten those up as well. But really took my time with this. I wasn't aggressive with the actual chisels, just working the material off bit by bit, layer by layer, and that seemed to be a lot better than just attacking the actual epoxy itself. The wood drove really well. I could tell the difference on the chisels, the difference between the actual wood and the epoxy. And what I was concerned about were these cracks that were in there from the beginning, and I was worried that I was going to hit a spot and we were going to get a part that would just fly off the lathe. Again, go back, watch my older videos, and you can see portions of projects that I would do where the lip of the bowl would catch one of those cracks and just fly off the lathe. But really taking your time, coming back with different chisels, and just being patient. I think that was the biggest lesson I learned from this, was just be patient, stop the lathe, adjust what you're doing, tighten the chuck jaws, and it'll turn out just fine. So after about 3.5 hours from start to finish, you can see the cracks on there, but we're gonna sand a lot of that out. The wood chips just look totally wonky. It's a combination of just small little ribbons and dust, basically. So on this one, we're just doing 320 or 340 all the way up to 1500. No wet sanding on this one. Really took our time with the sanding. That's where you make your money. That's how the polish is going to come out. And I got to say, the end product on this, absolutely gorgeous. Loved how this turned out. This is probably the best bowl I have ever made, and can't be more happy about how this turned out. Again, you guys, today is July 15th when I'm doing this narration. I finished it yesterday, July 14th. You guys are watching this on Sunday, but this turned out absolutely gorgeous. I can't reiterate how cool this looks. And all the projects going forward are pretty much going to be larger bowl projects. I'm going to try to do better as far as editing, as far as making bowls. And, you know, woodworking, there's a million of us on YouTube, and, you know, we all do things a little bit different, but, you know, this is an art form, and art is subjective, and you guys might not like this bowl, but I think this looks absolutely stunning, absolutely gorgeous. I love how this turned out. Really happy, can't say enough good things about it. We're going to do a similar project next week as well, and every piece of wood is different. So even though it kind of is in the same theme, the same kind of design, every piece of wood is different. All these bowls turn out different. Love how these look. So hope you guys like it. Hope you guys are getting something out of it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe. Peace. Alright, so project is done. And I know I say this from time to time, but this is probably the best bowl I have ever made, ever. This thing is absolutely gorgeous. This looks like some professional woodworker type of shit. Like the stuff that I would see when I was getting into woodworking, and would see guys go oh my god, I could never build something like that. And now, almost 5 years later, I'm turning out projects just like that. Looks absolutely gorgeous. So this thing is probably one of the larger bowls I've ever made, but man, it looks awesome. And just scrap firewood, just every bowl like this is just different and unique. It has its own personality and everything. The lathe barely handled it. I'm sure I went over that in the commentary, but we got it done, and I think I'm going to start just doing larger projects. I think I'm going to stay away from the smaller ones and try to build my skill set and try to do bigger, larger projects as much as my lathe will tolerate. Because it's a mini lathe, it's not a large lathe like you see with other professional woodworkers that do it full time. This is just, you know, it's a hobby lathe essentially. But I'm sure there's some professionals that use it too, but I'm a hobbyist, I'm not a professional. But man, the things you can do when you practice a lot, it looks absolutely gorgeous. I love how this turned out, can't say that enough. So the projects are going to start getting better, looking cooler. Next week's probably be something similar to this. The videos are going to start getting better, just perfecting my craft, because it's art. It's art. This is just, it's something, and it's all subjective, but I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. I love how this turned out. So hope you guys liked it. Hope you guys are getting something out of it. Today is actually July 14th. It's Friday. You guys are going to watch this 2 days later, so hope everybody's doing good. It's hot as hell in Texas, 106 degrees in the shop, but needed to get this done. But hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, peace.